Ready when you are.
Hi, I'm Wanda Mouzon from Miami Beach, Florida.
And I'm Steve Mouzon, and we're partners in quite a number of things. Um,
In work and in life.
yeah, so I think you got a few questions here. Go ahead and,
All right.
get
Well,
into them.
Steve, start off by telling about you and your business and the company of Mouzon Design.
Well, we have a kind of a curious way of going about things, and that is that we don't do anything the normal way. Basically, what we do is we say, well, what are the needs that aren't being met, and how can we fill them? And so, most of the things that we do are actually kind of services that we've essentially made up ourselves. So there's no just regular old architecture or anything like that. It's some pretty peculiar stuff that we do. Now, for example, in Mouzon Design, which is the business that we're partners in, we do a collection of house plans, for example, that are tailored to the new urbanism. Now, the new urbanism is it's a set of ideas about how to build places that are compact and mixed use and walkable. Started out with Seaside about 30 years ago in Florida, and there's now, I don't know, 1,000 new urbanist communities, neighborhoods all over the country, something like that, and then in other places around the world too. So it's really catching on as an idea of how to build. And so basically all of our tools and products that we have are about things that work into the new urbanism somehow.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay.
that's
Yeah.
that.
Well, you have started a very unique idea called the Original Green. How about if you describe that for us?
The original green is, all I did is try to observe what was already there. So the original green is the sustainability that all of our ancestors knew by heart. Now, this is one of those things that we're trying to fill a need that isn't currently being met. And the way that I mean that is that right now, all the discussions you hear about building green and about sustainability are almost all about something that I call gizmo green. And gizmo green basically is the idea that with good enough equipment and good enough materials, that we can be sustainable, when in reality that's only a tiny part of the equation. And so the original green is the sustainability that actually existed before the thermostat age. After the thermostat age, that's the point where you can kind of flip a switch and think everything's okay. Well, we now know that it isn't okay. And so before that time, we actually built places that were green in which it was meaningful to build buildings that were green. Because you see, right now, you can have a building with all sorts of green points, but if the place isn't sustainable, it really doesn't matter. You're really not living sustainably. And so the places must first of all be nourishable, because if you can't eat there, you can't live there. And then after that, accessible, and then serviceable and securable. And that essentially is a description of the new urbanism. Then the buildings must be, first of all, lovable, because if a building can't be loved, it won't last. And then durable, and then after that, flexible, because if these buildings are going to actually be loved for centuries and last for centuries, they'll be used for things that we can't even imagine now. And finally, after that, frugal. Now, one thing about frugality, it's not just about the frugality of the equipment, because the most efficient machine is one that is off. And so what we try to do is do the natural things first that will allow the buildings to condition themselves for most of the year, and then, in the most extreme temperatures, you'll flip a switch and take care of the real extreme hot or the real extreme cold. But that's essentially what the original green is. And the operating system that underlays all of this is something that we call a living tradition. Now, this has nothing to do with the tradition in a history book. It's something that everybody participates in a culture where everybody knows why we do what we do. So that's, in a nutshell, what the original green is. And it actually underlies everything that we do at this point. So everything that we'll talk about from this point forward is essentially built on the original green.
Sounds like pretty common sense approach to living sustainably.
Well, it's what I call common sense, plain spoken sustainability, because that's the idea. Because here's the thing: if it's a discussion about sustainability, you shouldn't feel like you need to have a PhD to participate in the discussion. It ought to be something
Or be a multimillionaire.
or that either. Exactly. So it should be
Yeah.
something that you should be able to do simply.
Yeah. Well, I understand you have also started an organization called the New Urban Guild. Tell us some about the New Urban Guild.
Well, the Guild is something that I founded about a decade ago, and right this moment there's, well, I think 64, I believe that's right, of some of the best traditional architects and designers, mostly in the U.S. There's a few that are offshore, but mostly in the U.S. And we all focus on the new urbanism again, and as you can tell from the name, because the idea is to be able to do architecture that actually fits there. Because a typical, most of the typical houses and shops, like a strip center and all this, and a suburban house with the big snout house with the garage to the front, that doesn't really work in the new urbanism. And so the architecture all has to be different if you're going to actually build these places that people want to walk around and live more compactly and more neighborly, I should say, because you get to know more of your neighbors. And so, but that requires a different architecture, and so that's part of what we do with the Guild, is to create this architecture. Now, it's in a process called charrettes, and I guess we can talk more about that in a moment.
Okay, all right. Well, you brought up charrettes. Maybe just go ahead and describe what that is, and describe how you put a team together for a charrette, and where do you go to do charrettes, and
Well, the basic idea of a charrette, well, first of all, the word charrette comes from a French word for little cart. And here's what happened was 100 years ago. The École des Beaux-Arts had a system of education where they would have the students get their assignment and go back to their apartment to work. And then when the project was due, the professor would send around his assistant with this little cart pulling behind him. And when the students heard the cart bumping over the cobblestone streets of Paris, then they would frantically rush out, because they weren't done, of course, jump up on the charrette and frantically try to finish the drawing. So charrette came to mean at that point in time a period of frantic design activity. Today what it is we will get together a group of architects. It can be anywhere from 4 to a dozen on these New Urban Guild charrettes. We'll bring them in, all in the same room. Everyone's working together. The developer or town founder is there. The people that will be building the buildings are there. If there's some clientele already, that they're there. So everybody's all in the room together. And so when we're working on these things, it's not like you say, well, I'll get back with you on that, and go back to your office and wait 3 weeks. No, it's more like somebody comes up and they says, well, hey, here's a concern. We've got to do it this way. And you say, okay, I'll be back with you in an hour. And so you have this really, really fast feedback loop where you can get literally in 1 week, you can get as much work done in a charrette setting as you can get done in 3, 4, 5, 6 months in a normal office setting.
is it as frantic as the original charrette?
Well,
jumping on the charrette?
It's not quite so. You don't risk life and limb by jumping up on a moving vehicle, but it really is quite frantic. It's some long hours, but it's some of the most intense. Matter of fact, it's really funny because when the charrette is over, it's a very commonly known phenomenon where the client or the town founder will have what we call post-charrette depression syndrome, because after all the just the adrenaline, the design adrenaline of that week or so, or however many days it is, when they come down from that, and we're used to that, of course, that's just what we do, but when they come down from that design high, then for 3 or 4 days they're kind of like, oh gee, what do we do now, and so it's something that is very definitely a high. I mean, there is no more intense design experience that anybody that I know has ever taken part in.